for these things. We give you praise and thanks, and it is in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
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 Those of you who would like to, if you would now put your hand on your hearts and let's pledge allegiance to our flag.
Jim Manning got the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag.
To the flag of the United States of America.
And to the
republic for which it stands.
One
nation under God, and indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. That brings us to item 4 on our agenda, approval of minutes for our special call meeting on July 14th. Chair, entertain a motion.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
It's a motion for approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Been properly second. Any discussion, changes, deletions? There being none, I'll ask Roberts to call the roll.
Need to ask Ms. Only to call the roll.
Thank you very much, Ms. Only. Ms. Only?
Hang on. Okay. Malinowski,
Yes.
Dickerson,
Yes.
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Kennedy, Manning,
No.
Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
The minutes passed.
Motion passed.
Thank you. That brings us to the adoption of the agenda. Chair, entertain a motion for adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Dickerson, you recognize.
I believe Mr. Brown has, where's Mr. Brown? I don't see him, but I believe Mr. Brown have
Online, yeah.
an amendment to the agenda. Mr. Brown, where is he?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. Ms. Dickerson, I'm on. I can see you.
Okay, no, you can't. If you do, boy, I'm finna fly.
Am I recognized, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, you go ahead, Mr. Brown.
I'm requesting that we remove item 17C listed under other items. That title of that item is Old Town Antique Mall Proposed Improvements. Would you please remove that item from the agenda?
Yes, we'll carry that with the motion for as we move forward with adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to adopt the agenda with the removal of 17.
Madam Chair, just hold 1 minute. I think I want to try to add something else. Our employee evaluation oversight ad hoc committee had a meeting today to take up a couple very important items, since this is our last regular scheduled meeting prior to our August break. And that is regarding, you may recall that we agreed to move forward with a temporary clerk for our office. In order to do that, we need to add that item to the agenda for discussion tonight, or for a report from that committee. Also, there are 2 other items on that committee meeting agenda that the committee made recommendations for, dealing with administrative evaluation and the clerk of council position in terms of the process. So, so the motion would be to add those items to the agenda as a report from the Employee Evaluation Oversight Committee. Ms. Newton, did I leave anything out? Ms. Newton?
No, Mr. Chair.
Did I leave anything out as in terms of what needs to be reported out of that committee?
No, Mr. Chair. You captured the 3 items that I have on my list. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, Mr. Chair, I amend my motion to amend the agenda with those 3 items, 2 to add and 1 to remove of the Old Town, item 17.
Thank you very much. That would.
17,
Of item
okay.
17. That would.
17C, 17C.
Approval 17C, and to add the report from the Employee Evaluation Oversight Committee. Is there a second? Is there a second to that amended motion?
Second.
It's moving properly second. Is there no further discussion?
Mr. Chairman. This is Mr. Manning.
Ms. Manning, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just so I can understand the time frame. So the items that we're looking to add this evening came from a meeting that was held earlier today. Did that meeting have 24-hour notice?
Yes, the meeting did, yes.
So why couldn't we have done an agenda? Well, why couldn't we have published a revised agenda for tonight for the public to have known that those items would be a part of tonight's meeting rather than finding out at this moment?
Well, we weren't real sure in terms of which items would be referred from this particular meeting at that given time. Is one of the reasons.
Mr. Chair, I'm with Mr. Mann. I want to know whether these items are properly before us.
They are if council agrees.
Okay.
And I would have, yes. Any further discussion about the agenda before we move forward?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Bill Malinowski.
Mr. Malinowski, you recognize.
Yeah, I'm just trying to go back, and I think it's something that we were discussing in the Rules Committee, and Attorney Farah mentioned that under the FOIA Act, that if something gets added into the agenda after that 24-hour agenda notice, that we need a 2/3 majority of members present. I just to vote yes. I just want to make sure that does that pertain to this? We can get that input from legal.
Legal, did you hear the point?
Thank you.
I'm sorry, this is Brad. Can you hear me?
Okay. Thank you. Hello?
Yes, Ms. Kennedy, you're on. We hear you.
Okay, because I had to call Kyle. I wasn't sure you all were hearing me.
All right, thank you. Ms. Farah, Mr. Manning, I just want to know whether or not it's going to require a 2/3 vote.
It would be 2/3 if there had been 24 hours notice. 24 hours notice, you need unanimous consent to suspend the rules. But as far as adding an item, after the meeting is started, that is a FOIA requirement. That is the 2/3.
Thank you. So what I would ask council to do is, what we're going to do, we're going to vote on the motion, regarding the Employee Evaluation Oversight Committee report, because we know that requires a 2/3. So we would, I would entertain a motion to add that item to the agenda, independent of adding it to the whole agenda item, because the agenda itself doesn't require 2/3 votes. So the motion is for to add the evaluation employee committee report to the agenda. Is there a second?
So moved.
Second. So we'll take the motion on the addition of the report of the evaluation committee to the agenda, which require 2/3 votes. Ms. Robinson Carroll.
It's only.
Thank you very much. I apologize. I'm so used to that. Excuse me, Ms. Only. Ms. Only?
Malinowski,
Yes.
Dickerson.
I'll come back in a minute.
Okay. McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Kennedy, Manning, Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton,
Yes.
Dickerson.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passed.
According to my notes, that's 2/3. So that is amended to the agenda, and we also, so now the motion would be for the approval of the agenda with that item and the removal of item 17C.
C.
Entertain a motion.
I made a motion earlier, make a motion to, make a motion to approve the agenda with those 3 items, 1 to remove and 2 to add, 17
Thank you.
and the report from the committee.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Moving properly second. Ms. Ralph, you call the roll?
You better put a note in front of you, that's Miss Only.
I'm sorry, you know, I'm so used to saying that. If I say it one more time, I'm gonna quit.
Okay.
Don't say that.
Malinowski,
Yes.
Dickerson,
Yes.
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Kennedy, Manning,
No.
Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you. That now move us, so our next item on the agenda, which is item 4. I apologize. Let me get my other agenda. Item 6, which is the presentation of proclamation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of council, July 26th of this year is the 30th anniversary of the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act by President George H.W. Bush. And I have submitting a proclamation to be read, recognizing and honoring those veterans who have served us and who have become disabled. Being the son of a disabled American veteran, it certainly was personal experience of mine, knowing what that's like for not only the veterans who are disabled, but the families of them as well. And so I've asked Ms. Only if she will read that proclamation for me. She has it in her presence. Thank you very much.
Ms. Ollie?
Yes, sir. It's a proclamation recognizing the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disability Act, whereas signed into law on July 26, 1990, the Americans with Disability Act ensures the rights of citizens with disabilities by prohibiting discrimination in the areas of education, employment, government services, places of public accommodations, commercial facilities, and other vital areas. And whereas the ADA is considered the first and most comprehensive law in the world to provide equal treatment to Americans with disabilities, and whereas July 26, 2020 is the 30th anniversary of the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act by President George H.W. Bush, and whereas the Americans with Disabilities Act reaffirmed the ideas that all people are entitled to participate fully in our economy and democracy, have something to contribute, and deserve every chance to achieve their full potential. And whereas our community is enriched by the diversity and accomplishments of Americans with disabilities, and whereas the 30th anniversary of the ADA provides an opportunity to renew our commitment to the ADA's principles in ensuring the rights and independence of citizens with disabilities and empowering our communities to benefit from the contributions of all Americans, and therefore be it proclaimed that Richland County salutes everyone whose efforts contributed to the enactment of the Americans with Disabilities Act, commits itself to compliance with and furthering the principles of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I need to note that Mr. Manning, Mr. Ratio, Mr. Malinowski, Mr. Livingston also would like to be added to this proclamation.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And
And
Ms. Myers.
Mr. Jackson, would I be able to do, since I'm married to a veteran?
By all means,
Well, I would like to be added to them.
I think I heard Ms. Myers say also,
I think that's the
Yes,
council.
sir. Thank you, Mr.
why don't
Jackson.
we just add everyone? Why don't we just add everyone unless there's anyone who's opposed to being added?
Yes, sir.
That
There
would
you
be
go.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, colleagues. I want to thank the constituents in my district who brought it to my attention to do this. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That brings us to item 7, report of the attorney of the executive session items. Mr. Smith. Mr. Carr.
Yes, sir. This is Brad Farah from legal. I don't have any items. However, I do note that under the county administrator's report at item 10B, there is a personnel matter that would qualify under 34-40 of the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act for executive session at council's discretion. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take up that item when we get to you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm not sure what number the report of the Evaluation and Oversight Committee will be, but one of the items is a personnel matter.
We're gonna do that right after the Blue Ribbon Committee.
Okay. Well, since you were talking about executive session, I just wanted to note that one of those items is personnel.
Yes, one of those items is executive session. Thank you. Yes. That brings us to citizens input. 8A, which only did anyone submit request for input?
I didn't receive any comments.
No comments. What about item 9A, citizen input must pertain to a county matter not on the agenda?
Sir, I didn't receive any comments for that one either.
No comments for that one. Thank you. That brings us to item 10, report of the county administrator, Mr. Brown.
Mr. Chair, members of council, since last week's report under this item specifically related to the coronavirus update, there have not been any substantive changes. So unless the council has specific questions related to that, then I do not have additional information that was substantially different from last week's report, Mr. Chair and members of council.
Thank you. Any questions of the administrator regarding the coronavirus update?
Mr. Chair, this is Delia. I have just one.
Ms. Myers, you recognize.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Brown, thank you for that. Just a follow-up question from last week. Last week, you told us that you all will be putting together some clarifying information to be given to businesses and citizens. Have you completed that process?
We have not completed, but we have actually had some of our fire marshals have been going out to various facilities, giving information as we have it. We do have some information that we have put together. And then the next conversation we're going to have is we're going to need to meet with the ad hoc committee. The chair and I have talked about that so that we can make sure that our clarifying information is consistent with what we believe the will of the committee and the council is.
Thank you, sir. Can you circulate that so that we are all aware of what you think that is and what you're providing, at least preliminarily, to the businesses?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Chair, that I'm done. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have one other question.
You recognize Ms. Dickerson?
Mr. Brown, have we received the face mask yet? And have you determined when we get them, what areas and how we're going to distribute them?
We have not received we ordered 60,000. We have not received them just yet. The determination was made by, we did receive from a couple council members some areas that you all have identified in your districts. And when you come back from your well, I should say when you come back, but when we get those masks in, I'm going to reach out to you and tell you the masks are in and find out what dates, if you want to pass those out with us. But those dates have not been set. It will be specific to once we get the mask in, then we will coordinate the date with each council member that we will be passing those out in their respective districts. So you will know because we will contact you once we receive them, Ms. Dickerson.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. That concludes my remarks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brown?
Mr. Chair, the only other item is the executive session item, which is the grievance matter, unless the council chooses to address that right now without the need to go into executive session.
Mr. Malinowski, I think it was you had a question the last time.
Yes, sir. And I spoke with the administrator today about that. There are two of them. Item Council Memorandum 7-2, 2020. I agree with the administrator on that one. I would recommend that we follow the administrator's recommendation.
You heard the motion reference the one dealing with 7-2.
Mr. Malinowski, would you clarify the motion so we know how to vote on it, please?
Yeah, the motion is that the council memorandum 7-2, 2020 that we received regarding an employee grievance, we uphold the administrator's recommendation.
Okay, I second the motion.
Thank you.
It's been moved and properly second. Any discussion reference the motion? And Mr. Malinowski, just for clarification, we're referring to the one reference to jail, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Any further questions reference that motion? There being none, I'll ask Ms. Owning to call the roll regarding the grievance 7-220.
Malinowski,
Yes.
Dickerson,
Yes.
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Kennedy,
Yes.
Manning, Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
It passes. Thank you.
Thank you. The other item, is there a motion on that item, or do we need to discuss something that someone need to discuss something?
Mr. Chair, I could make a motion on that one.
To reconsider.
Yeah,
No, this is the next item first.
Yeah, the next one, and then we can, the next one, I don't know that we need to go to executive session. I would just like to make some comments about it. I disagree on this one with the administrator's recommendation, because in speaking with the administrator, if we have a rule that says all employees are to receive annual evaluations, and an annual evaluation is not given, just to merely list, to provide a list of potential alleged infractions, which did not really stipulate there was an infraction, just that, hey, I'd like you to do this better, I'd like you to respond to this. That doesn't constitute an evaluation. And if the employee were given an evaluation, they would have had the opportunity to address any shortcomings that were brought to their attention, which they did not have the opportunity to do in this case. So therefore, to receive this last minute letter that was handed out, I don't think is proper. The letter I refer to as a last chance agreement. I think that an employee evaluation would have been able to provide the employee the opportunity to correct any shortcomings there were in their work output, and they would have either corrected them and not received this last chance agreement, or they would have not corrected and probably been received a dismissal notice. So I don't think this should be in the employee's personnel folder, and they should be given an evaluation and start from there. I don't believe that just because an employee has tenure and quite a bit of time in their position or with the county, that comes into play here. That would be discrimination to me against an employee with time by saying, well, they should have known better. Everybody should be treated the same, day one or day 101. So therefore, I believe that my motion would be to not place the last chance agreement into the employee's file, give the employee their annual evaluation, and let them try to resolve any shortcomings.
You heard Mr. Malinowski's motion reference the second grievance.
That's Mr. Malinowski, that's your motion?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, well, I second that motion, Mr. Malinowski.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Dickerson.
It's been moved and properly second. Any discussion around that motion?
Mr. Chair, am I recognized?
You recognize me.
I guess I just wanted to go on record and say that I might have some questions about this that might be better discussed in executive session. If it's the will of the body to approve this recommendation, that's fine, but my vote will reflect that. Thank you.
No, it is an executive session item if council so desire, yes.
Mr. Chair, this is
Yes.
Delia. This is Ms. Myers again.
Ms. Myers, please go ahead.
Is Ms. Newton done?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would just, in harmony with what Ms. Newton has just said, I have some questions that are probably better addressed in executive session. I would actually be inclined to, I understand Mr. Malinowski's concerns, but having reviewed the grievance, I would be inclined to disagree with what he's saying. So I'd like to discuss it in executive session.
Okay, when we'll take this up when we take the motion up to go into executive session.
Mr. Chair, you've got a motion
Got a
and
motion on the floor.
Your motion is still on from Mr. Malinowski. Thank you. Any further discussion reference, Mr. Malinowski, unless there's stuff.
Mr. Chair, Mr.
Yes.
Chair, I'd like
Yes.
to offer a substitute motion to defer this item until after executive session.
The motion is to defer this item to after executive session. Is there a second?
Second.
It's moving properly second to defer to after executive session. I'm gonna ask Ms. Only to call the roll for the substitute motion for deferral to after executive session.
Malinowski,
no.
Dickerson,
No.
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Kennedy,
No.
Manning,
Yes.
Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
The motion passes.
We'll take that item up after executive session. That brings us to item 11, report of the interim clerk of council. Ms. Only.
Yes, sir. The clerk's office doesn't have a report.
Thank you. That brings us to item 12, report of the chair. Chair does not have a report. That brings us to item 13, approval of consent items. That's 13A through E. Chair.
Move to approve, Mr. Chair.
Regarding consent items. Who's that?
Second.
Move to approve.
Second.
The motion.
To approve the consent items.
Motion for approval of consent items, is that A through E? All of them?
Yes, yes, sir.
Is there a second?
It's second.
Okay, so move
Second.
properly second for approval of consent items A through E. Any discussion? If not, I'll ask Ms. Owen to call the roll.
Malinowski,
Yes.
Dickerson,
Yes.
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Kennedy,
Yes.
Manning, Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. That brings us to item
Mr. Chair.
15, third reading item.
Mr. Chair.
You recognize Ms. Newton.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. To go back to something previously, it's come to my attention that you didn't hear my vote on approval of the minutes, and I voted yes.
Thank you. Please make sure the record reflect that, Ms. Owen.
Mr. Chair, just a point of order.
You recognize.
On the
Ms.
first, thank you, sir. On the first grievance that Mr. Malinowski moved to approve, and that I think that motion carried. Do we need to reconsider that? Does the administrator wish to have that reconsidered?
That's what I was trying to do, and then they brought up a second one, Ms. Myers. So I was asking for a motion to reconsider if Mr. Brown.
If council wish to make a motion to reconsider, yes.
I made a motion to reconsider.
I'll second it.
It's moving properly, second to reconsider item 10, B, the part dealing with the 7-220 grievance. Any further discussion? Well, Ms. Olin, can you call the roll for reconsideration?
Yes, sir. Malinowski,
No.
Dickerson,
No.
McBride,
No.
Livingston,
No.
Kennedy,
No.
Manning, Jackson,
No.
Myers,
No.
Newton.
No.
Motion fails.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Dixon. You did say that, but we got caught up in the second one. That brings item 14 A, third reading items. That would be item 14 A.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve.
Second.
I'll second.
Motion for approval and second. Any discussion reference item 14A? There being none, I'll ask is on the call the roll.
Malinowski,
Yes.
Dickerson,
Yes.
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Kennedy,
Yes.
Manning, Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
Myers, yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. That brings us to item 15, second reading items. Item 15A, authorizing the extension and delivery of fee in lieu of ad valorem taxes, infrastructure credit agreement, and amendments of certain existing fee in lieu of ad valorem agreements by between Richland County, South Carolina, and Project Fortune to provide for payment of fee in lieu of taxes, authorizing certain infrastructure credits, and there are others.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion
Second.
for item, that's moving proper second for approval for item 15A, discussion.
Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Myers?
Yes, sir, thank you. On this item, I will be voting in favor of it, but I've specifically asked some questions of the ED chair, and I know that he will work with me to try to get those questions answered. And I'd just like to go on record as saying that it is at least as important as getting this done for the potential company. It is equally important that we work out something that is of benefit to the surrounding community. So I would just ask my colleagues to consider that. I know that they're all very interested as I am, in making sure this is fair. So I will, on this reading, be voting against it, not because I'm against it, but because I do think there are issues that need to be resolved surrounding it. But I want the chair of the Economic Development Committee to know I thank him for his time and attention on this, and hopefully we can resolve it in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Okay. Mr. Jackson?
Mr. Chair, let me say that I did talk with Ms. Myers, and just as she and I worked collaboratively together on another project up off Shop Road, and similarly in terms of taking something that wasn't there, creating something that benefited the community, it would be my very intent to do the same thing in this effort as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you. And if there are no other discussions, I'll ask Ms.
Chair. Mr. Chair.
Ms. Newton, you recognize.
Yes, I just had a quick question. This is second reading, and this is our last special call until the end of August. So does that mean that third reading of this item would be coming back to us at the end of August?
Yes.
Thank you.
If there are no further discussion, I'll ask Ms. Olin to call the roll.
Malinowski,
Yes.
Dickerson,
Yes.
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Kennedy,
Yes.
Manning, Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
No.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. That brings us to item 16, Blue Ribbon Committee, Blue Ribbon Ad Hoc Committee. Item 16A, CDBG MIT Action Plan Update, approval of the CDBG MIT Action Plan. Mr. Brown, who's staff's going to present that?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of council. This is Clayton Voignier, Community Planning and Development Director. On August 30th, 2019, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development allocated $21,864,000 in community development block grant mitigation funds to Richland County as a grantee recovering from a qualifying disaster in 2015. In order to expend these funds, HUD requires the development and submission of an action plan that includes proposed mitigation activities as well as the mitigation needs assessment that identifies and quantitatively analyzes all significant current and future disaster risks, providing a substantive basis for the proposed mitigation activities. Through the Richland County CDBG MIT Action Plan, staff is proposing 2 infrastructure and 2 housing programs based on the results of our mitigation needs assessment. These programs are designed to improve resilience to public infrastructure, mitigate future flood damage, reduce impacts of flooding and severe storms on public safety and property damage, enhance the long-term resilience of community lifelines, and address the unmet household mitigation needs among the most socially vulnerable populations. This action plan was published to the county's mitigation website from March 18 through June 5th, 2020 to allow for public input and comment. At its May 28th, 2020 meeting, the Blue Ribbon Committee unanimously recommended that County Council approve this CDBG MIT Action Plan for submission to HUD by the August 31st, 2020 deadline.
Mr. Chair,
And staff recommendation is
Staff recommended and the Blue Ribbon Committee unanimously recommended that County Council approve the MIT Action Plan.
Thank you very much. You've heard the recommendation from the committee and staff.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Dickerson, you're recognized.
I want to know from Mr. Voigt, so the plan is completed out, you've expended all of the funds that's available for this particular item. Are there any other available funds in this particular fund balance?
The action plan requires us to spend the entire allocation of the 21.8 million roughly. We have not spent the funds yet. This is a budget for an action plan to spend the funds over a 12-year grant period.
Oh, okay, thank you. That answers my question. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Ms. President, Ms. Malinowski, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would, for the record, just like to state that these particular funds that are being given to Richland County for using the CDBG-MIT funds, it's extremely important to the citizens of Richland County. And I think it was really somewhat unfair to council members to be asked to absorb and understand 176 pages of data in the short period of time we've been given. And while there are different proposals within here, I'd like to refer to page 249 of our agenda, where there were some minutes from the Blue Ribbon meeting, and Ms. Myers, Councilwoman Myers, asked a question about that possibly there needs to be much more public input. And before moving forward to council with its blessing, we should try to get more public input. Has any additional public input been attempted to be obtained?
Mr. Malinowski, I thank you. I was going to go there myself. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
So in terms of the official public comment period, that closed on June 5th. However, there have been continuing meetings with the Conservation Commission as well as members of Gills Creek Watershed Association that I've personally talked to, as well as other stakeholders that I've talked to. And although their comments will not be officially reflected in the action plan, there is certainly going to be continuing opportunities for public input that we're going to take into account and continue to meet with those stakeholders throughout the period of the grant.
Okay, I'll hold any other questions on that to give Councilwoman Myers the opportunity to weigh in on that, since she already has commented on it. On page 192 of our agenda, Mr. Voignier, it shows the budget, and it shows a total between planning and program administration of $4.8+ million. That's 28% of the total. And I'm wondering, and there's just 17 million to complete projects. Seems that this particular amount giving for funding is a little bit excessive, I might say, and for professional consulting. And that, why can't we retain qualified individuals to do this so that we could put these funds toward the actual assisting of the people that really need it?
The Federal Register allows for up to 5% to be allocated to program administration and 15% to planning. So those funds are what's been allocated to those activities. So currently that is the budget for those programs. Those funds not only support the administration of the programs, but other efforts as well the other planning efforts that will support the infrastructure programs and implementation of all the programs. So the budget was put together by staff who felt that the current amounts for the infrastructure and housing programs were adequate to meet those needs. If there are additional funds available as we get further into the grant, we will look at reallocating those to those projects if that's necessary from our planning budget.
Okay, because on the next page, page 193, you've got a design study cost. Next to it, you've got a construction cost. Your design study cost is over 50% of the construction cost. Can you explain that one? That really seems like a lot.
That budget was put together by our Public Works department. I think one of the staff members is on the call today. Sunithia Williams would be able to respond to that better if she's on the call.
Okay, we'll wait to hear from Ms. Williams.
Hi, this is Sunithia Williams. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes, the estimates that were put in for the infrastructure projects were based off of the current costs that we've seen with other infrastructures throughout the Department of Public Works, projects that have happened in the stormwater, roads and drainage, and engineering projects that we put out. So it is an estimate based off of what we've seen fees come back for to do some of these studies and these plans. But as Clayton mentioned earlier, as we get into the projects and if the funding changes and we've estimated high, then we can have the opportunity to reallocate those resources to more construction projects or other areas within the program.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Ms.
may I be
Dawn.
recognized?
Ms. Myers, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. So Mr. Malinowski went definitely right to the space that I wanted to speak to. I am aware how we've defined stakeholders, and the stakeholders tend to be the same groups that we go back to repeatedly for all of our projects. I note that we have identified the Conservation Commission, the Gills Creek Watershed, and then sort of, I think probably we've identified the Builders Association, and those are all fine stakeholders, but they don't take in a large swath of the county that obviously should be considered a stakeholder. So my question is, since the time that I specifically asked for additional public input in the form of meetings after the Blue Ribbon Commission met, can you all tell me what meetings you've had with groups outside of those, because those groups had commented long before we raised those issues at the Blue Ribbon Commission meeting. Thank you.
If I understand your question, Ms. Myers, it's what other groups did we meet with after the Blue Ribbon Committee met besides those stakeholders that you listed? Is that your question?
Yes, besides those that had already contributed at that point, because those groups had already contributed. So I guess at the meeting, my concern was that we widen the net and get more input from a broader cross-section of the community. And what I'm asking now is, did we do that?
As you know, we did hold a public hearing on June 5th to try and get some of those additional stakeholders. We haven't had any additional public meetings with other stakeholders other than that public hearing. However, I have spoken to other stakeholders, in particular, the name is escaping me right now, but it's a regional organization. I spoke with them today, and we'll be looking to meet with them as well to get some input. So we haven't planned that yet, but that is something that we plan to do.
I guess my concern was, with this being such a large grant and with there being so much post-flood need, I was concerned at the Blue Ribbon Commission meeting and remain concerned now that we are continuously talking in a loop to the same people, and we are not getting to different groups of people whose input is incredibly important in making sure that we are actually meeting the need that exists. And in the plan documents, which are the ones that you submit to HUD, which become binding documents, that we have covered off all of those bases. And I know you can submit a significant, request for a significant change. I understand that. But my initial concern was that we include that we draft a plan that included the whole of Richland County, not just the request from the Conservation Commission and the home builders and, a few other groups that we normally seek out. So did we talk, for example, to the neighborhood association that, because that covers a very broad section of people? Did we, for example, reach out to any of the community groups that many of us meet with all the time? I mean, was there any outreach beyond just the normal things that we do? And I'm specifically asking that because, as you all know, the Lower Richland community and the Forest Acres communities both experienced really, really, really devastating impacts, as well as Kings Grant. And I'm concerned that those areas have not specifically been heard from. And I think it's important that they be heard from before we submit this proposal back to HUD.
So we did not talk specifically to those neighborhood associations. We have met with representative, the town administrator with Forest Acres, about a particular project. We have, and we'll be having further discussions with them as well. Part of the planning budget, what we've included in there is some education and outreach when the actual programs get started. Because again, these are all estimates. It's, we think we know how we're going to approach the programs, but we will be doing some education outreach when the actual programs get implemented.
Accepted and understood, and I'm going to move on, but my concern is that the programs will be approved by the time you're doing the education. And so if there's something that needs to be included in the programming, we haven't done the outreach to figure that out. And that was the concern I was raising at Blue Ribbon. It remains a concern for me now, but thank you for your answer.
And Ms. Myers, I do understand your concern, and we tried as much as we could within the time frame and the parameters that we had to get input from the public. We just weren't able to have those additional public meetings because we were compiling over the last month the public comments and providing responses to those.
Thank you.
I have Ms. McBride and Mr. Madden.
And Ms. Dickerson.
And then Ms. Dickerson.
I noticed that one of the criteria is that 50% of the funds must benefit low and moderate income individuals. How are you documenting this? And also, is there a way that the council can see the process being made and who's receiving the funds and what's being done in some type of report, not a massive report, but monthly or quarterly? Oftentimes with a project this big and large, it's really difficult to see where the funds are going and whether we're following those guidelines. But I am particularly interested in that area where the funds, 50% of the funds must benefit low and moderate income. And I agree with Mr. Malinowski about the indirect costs. That seems a little bit extravagant.
Ms. McBride, with respect to the housing program, those housing programs, there will be applications where we will have to document income eligibility, and we will be keeping those for our records. For some of the infrastructure projects, those qualify under an area benefit for LMI. And so those are documented in that way. So we will be having documented those in our case files, but also we are required by HUD to do a quarterly performance report that will be published on our website. And we'll be providing those reports to the Blue Ribbon Committee and can provide those to council as well.
It would be nice, since council has to approve this, and that council would get those reports. And I don't mean a 1,000-page report, but those reports that identify needed data to explain what's going on. And the other part is that you will be contracting out with different vendors, right, to get some of this work done?
Yes, ma'am.
I would strongly urge that we look at, I've asked different questions about this, the participation of minority vendors, both African Americans and women. And the county does not have a really highly successful rate. And I would like for us to take in consideration that, Mr. Brown, as we look at those businesses that we're contracting with.
Yes, ma'am, Ms. McBride.
Yes, ma'am. And we will, as we are doing any of our procurements and solicitations, I'll be glad to work with procurement to make sure that we're being as inclusive as possible.
And then I would like to have, and Mr. Brown, I'll discuss this with you, a way that we can look and monitor in terms of the vendors we're using and the contractors that we're using. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McBride. I have Mr. Manning and Ms. Newton.
You forgot me, but I think my question was answered.
And Ms. Dickerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Voignier, you mentioned the public hearing. When was that held?
On June 5th. We held two, actually, one on March 12th, but we did not get participation. We held another one on June 5th, where we got a fairly good representation for the allotted time that we had.
And what was the time of those meetings?
I believe the time was 5 o'clock.
Okay, so if you were working a 7 to 7 shift and you work for the county EMS, or you're a deputy with the sheriff's department, or you work for the county at Alvin Escalon, or you work for the fire department, that would have precluded you from having an opportunity to participate in the public hearing because
and it was a Friday, Mr. Manning.
It would have precluded a live participation. However, the public hearing was published on the website and in newspapers, so that for anybody that wanted to send in written comments could have done so, and we could have had those prepared and read at the public meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Manning.
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Ms. Myers, go ahead and put point of order. Go ahead.
I'd just like to note for the record that that one public hearing was held on at 5 o'clock on a Friday. So I just think it's important to point these things out because we have to gear these things towards public input. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Ms. Newton and then Ms. Dickerson. Did you ever get to?
You can strike my name, Mr. Chair. I think my questions have been answered. I can follow up with Mr. Voignier at a later time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Voignier, for this conversation. I guess I would just like to echo some of the concerns about trying to get more public involvement and comment. And I know that it's something that we've worked hard at. These have just been such extraordinary times over the past few months that I think it has made it even more difficult to get community input, but it makes it even more important. And so I guess I would ask, I know that we are up against the time deadline right now where we need to, if we're going to use these funds, we need to submit our plan. I guess that I would just ask that in addition to what you've outlined today, that we look for additional opportunities to continue to have conversations with the community, but in ways that are going to be consistent with the recommendations that we're submitting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anyone?
Yes.
Comments there?
I was just going to address Ms. Newton's comment and say yes.
Yes, go ahead,
yes, ma'am. Yes, we will absolutely attempt to do that as much as possible.
Thank you.
So what's before us is a recommendation of the Blue Ribbon Committee and staff, and it's been moved in second. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair, Bill Malinowski.
Mr. Malinowski, recognized.
Mr. Voignier, if this were not to pass, what are the next step? What happens then? Would there be more public hearings, or at least one more public hearing and a chance for input? And then council would have to have a special called meeting prior to that August 31st deadline?
If that is the will of the body, then that's what essentially would have to occur, as the next meeting is, I believe, scheduled for August 30th. And our deadline for submission is the 31st.
Okay, so we would not receive funding, is that correct? We would lose all the funding?
The funding would not be available. And I suppose, I'm not actually sure what HUD would come back to us with if we were not to submit in a timely manner. But I don't think it would be looked on favorably by HUD. That's just my opinion and my sense.
Are you allowed to request an extension prior to the middle due date?
No, sir. We have exhausted our extensions at this point.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I do have a question now. I hope we can pass this or make any modifications to this, because knowing HUD, if we miss this opportunity, I'm sure we will not be able to get these funds. I would prefer, hopefully, to pass it for two reasons. Number one, I do not want to do another special call meeting. And number two, I don't want to take the opportunity or miss the chance on getting these funds. So I hope we can approve it and then work out the kinks between now and the 31st. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further discussion? If not, I'll ask Ms. Only to call the roll for item 16A. The motion is a recommendation of the staff and Blue Ribbon Committee.
Malinowski.
In support of Ms. Dickerson's comments, yes.
Dickerson.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Malinowski.
McBride.
Yes.
Livingston.
Yes.
Kennedy. Manning. Jackson.
Yes, with reservations.
Myers,
We'll take it.
I would ask the staff to use the teletown hall format. We've had literally thousands of people attend those, so contingent on that, yes.
Okay, that's good.
Newton,
Yes, and as we're all adding caveats with the continuing to seek additional community input. Thank you.
it passes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, do we have to do a reconsideration on?
I will accept motion reconsideration, yeah. So
I entertain I will make a motion to reconsider this items because I really do not want to have another special meeting.
Second.
it's moving proper second reconsideration. I'll ask Ms. Owen to call roll for reconsideration.
Malinowski,
No.
Dickerson,
No.
McBride,
No.
Livingston,
No.
Kennedy, Manning, Jackson,
No.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
No.
Motion fails.
Thank you. That brings us.
Mr. Chair, Mr.
Yes.
Chair,
Ms. Myers, you
before
recognize.
we move on, may I just add just a brief comment? We have a list of what we have defined as stakeholders that seems to be the same list across all categories, and it leaves out broad sections of the county. I would ask the staff, especially those members of the staff, those divisions within the staff, those departments within the county, where there are large dollars at stake, to expand our definition of stakeholders beyond just the Conservation Commission, the building industry, and whomever else we can gather the attention of, and hope that maybe 10 or 20 people come to a public meeting when there are such large dollar figures at stake. And I would urge us to reach into all the communities at Richland County to get needed input. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I follow up on Ms. Myers' comments?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Myers. I do support what you just said because I'm listening to this. I heard the list of stakeholders, and they do not really represent sometimes those most needed communities who really have concerns. And so, like I said, the homeowners and the conservation, they'll flip out on you in a heartbeat if it's something. I think there's a little bit of bias in the way they go about certain things. And I'm going to say it, and I'm going to say it and without any remorse, the way they actually do, support certain projects and don't support other projects. I don't think they really understand, like your community is so in depth, and a lot of other communities have some serious problems that never get addressed because they never see those. And so because of the people who actually need to be at these meetings are a part of these meetings, like you said, the community leaders, those are the ones who actually know what's going on in the community, that not the conservation committee and the home builders. They, that's just my 2 cents, and that's what I'm going to say to support you on that, because that's oftentimes what happened. And many times what Ms. McBride said is why a lot of the lower income communities get left out, because nobody actually goes into those communities, and you don't get good positive representatives from those areas to have input as to what those communities need and where they are. So thank you for your comments, and I really support them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Livingston.
Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, sir. I hope that we, in having this conversation, continue it at the highest level possible. And continue it at the highest level possible, recognizing that if we want to engage other stakeholders, the responsibility lies with our own staff to make that happen. I don't want us to take advantage of, whether it's the conservation or the home builders or anyone else, any other group out there, who when asked to give their input, obliges and do that. That's not their fault that others are not asked. And so I think let's not be unfair to those groups. I would agree totally with what Myers says, but I say we need to expand it but that's not the responsibility or the fault of any of the groups that have been called on previously or routinely that we haven't expanded. And I can speak from experience, having been put in the same position with the penny program and trying to do the very same thing in terms of expanding it and trying to identify more minority vendors and all of the things that Ms. McBride and others have said tonight. It is our responsibility, in my opinion, our responsibility as a county under the leadership of our county administrator to make sure we expand, or as Myers said, cast that net wider and not castigate those who have been called upon, who are simply obliging and doing their part and giving their input. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Jackson, I hope my comments did not sound castigating. I was just speaking from my experience with all of those groups. Thank you very much.
Thank
Mr. Livingston, before we move on, can I add just one more thing?
you. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, and I agree with Mr. Jackson, Mr. Jackson's comments. We're grateful that those people do come to the table when called. And yes, they definitely are answering a needed call. So I'm grateful for that. But I would just remind us all, especially the staff, that we are now looking at the code rewrite. And it is that same very narrow list of so-called stakeholders that we have gone to continuously over the last 2 years to get input, for example, for the code rewrite. And Mr. Malinowski and I noted at one of the last meetings that we had the whole section on rural communities being rewritten, and there was not a stakeholder on the list that represented rural communities, and that is, as was noted in one of those meetings, the majority of Richland County. So it underscores, as Mr. Jackson rightly put it, our need to cast a wider net. And I would again just beg the staff to take that on board, because these decisions are critical and they impact people's daily lives. And if we don't make them aware, they don't know what's going on. So we have to ask them questions and invite them. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that item has been moved and second and voted on. So we'll go on to item, well, we'll add an item, that's item 16 and a half, which is the report of the evaluation committee. And I'm calling Ms. Newton for a report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are 3 items from the Evaluation and Oversight Committee. One of them, the first item, is a personnel matter regarding temporary assistance for the clerk's office. The second item is primarily for information, but also for council feedback, and that is a suggested evaluation process for the county administrator. As our council colleagues know, we are already in the process of conducting Mr. Brown's evaluation. He has done his self-evaluation and council members have completed their evaluation. The question is simply how we want to communicate that information, the results of that information to council and Mr. Brown. And what the Evaluation and Oversight Committee recommended is that when we get the aggregated feedback back from Find Great People, that will be shared with council as per usual, but that in addition to that the chair and vice chair would meet with our administrator to review the feedback from the evaluation, of course, opening that invitation to any council members that want to attend. So that is the recommendation that the committee is making to the body.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Ms. Myers, you recognize?
Can I ask Ms. Newton a question?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, Ms. Newton, that recommendation does not include the chair or somebody from the Employee Evaluation and Oversight Committee participating in the review of the administration?
Did you all did not. I can't say that we discussed it, but in fairness, I do want to say that I left part of it out, that also any members, individual council members who also wanted to have individual meetings with our administrator, that they would be able to do that. But I can't speak for the committee, but I think it could certainly be appropriate for someone from the Evaluation and Oversight Committee to join that meeting with the chair and vice chair. Again, the idea is that that meeting would be open to council members who wanted to attend.
I think with most other committees, the head of the committee participates in whatever activity is, you know, whatever activity comes out of that committee. So I would think that would be appropriate here. It's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. McBride, you recognize?
Yeah. Usually the committees, the evaluation committee and the administrative search committee, we develop the format and the process and working with the council. And once that's done, we've basically done our job and in terms of the tasks that we were assigned to. So the other part as a whole, then it goes back to the chair and the vice chair to represent the council. However, each individual council member has the opportunity to speak with the administrator regarding their evaluation. So the full council does have representation.
Thank you, Ms. McBride.
Any further discussion? You put your hand up. Any further discussion?
It's up, Mr. Newton. It's up, Mr. Livingston.
Mr. Jackson, recognize.
Yeah. First, let me say that I think that the task that the evaluation committee has been given was a yeoman's task, given the way in which it had to sort of build this airplane in flight. And so I want to commend them for that work, number one. Number two, I think it is important that before the chair and the vice chair meet with the administrator to go over the results of that evaluation, that the council be privy to that so that there is a collective understanding of what the result findings are and what the recommendations and conversation are going to be before they occur with the administrator, so that it is consistent with the overall sentiment of the group, not a consensus by any means, but basically based on the ratings, that there is a consensus of the views of the collective body, so that the administrator gets a clear message and not any mixed signals, one from the chair and vice chair reviewing a document, and B later from individual council members saying, well, I agree or didn't agree with that assessment. So I think we want to be real careful about making sure before that conversation occurs that we are informed as a body. Here's what we're proposing. Here's what our findings are. Here's what we think the strengths are. Here are the areas of improvement. And here's the overall rating or whatever you're going to do. And also typically tied to that, oftentimes, is either A, an extension of a contract, or B, the conversation regarding some sort of a merit increase as well. So I think we don't want to leave that out. I think both of those need to be a part of that as well. Thank you very much.
May I respond, Mr. Chair?
Yes, and I will follow. Go ahead. And then Ms. McBride.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jackson. And so first, I want to clarify any area where I misspoke. So to your point about council feedback, the idea is that, yes, that Find Great People's plan is to indeed aggregate all the feedback and then bring it to council as a body. The question is then, how do you facilitate that conversation that shares that feedback with Mr. Brown? And it would be quite a lot of humans in the room to have all 11 of us doing it simultaneously. But the idea absolutely was to bring that to council first and have us look at the broad overarching feedback. So if I was unclear on that, I do apologize.
I probably missed it. Thank you very much for clarifying it for me.
Thank you. Ms. McBride?
I was just going to clarify, Ms. Newton has already done it.
Thank you. And I was too, Ms. Newton have already done it. Any other questions about that? And there'll be, follow-up information to council about clarification and all of that too.
And we will report feedback from Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead, I'm sorry.
We'll provide once you share, after council reviews the aggregated data, then gives you permission to share with Mr. Brown. Then if Mr. Brown has any feedback, then you would share that back with the council.
Any other questions?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. I mentioned two other points, and they were as a result of the evaluation. Typically, there's some conversation about a contract extension, A, and B, typically there's some conversation about a merit increase as well. And so I just want to make sure that's recorded, that those are also two issues that typically are associated with an evaluation at this level of this type. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll make note of that.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Mann, go ahead, please.
so I have a little bit of concern that that my colleague, Mr. Jackson's talking about a contract extension and a merit raise when we've not seen the results of the evaluation. The results of the evaluation may give the body an indication that those would be the last two things that we would want to do. So I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves talking about what we're going to do with the valuation until we see what the value is. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I thought Mr. Jackson was saying we'd have to take some kind of disposition regardless of what it is, and those are some examples. I was assuming.
Exactly. I was not suggesting, Mr. Manning, we do it. I'm simply suggesting that that is usually part of the conversation, either to do or not to do those two items. And I didn't get the impression from the committee that anyone had had that conversation to even consider it. Not that we would do it. That's all. Thank you.
The question would be, you know, whatever the disposition is afterwards, it could be any of those things or something different. Any other discussion? Back to you, Ms. Newton.
So then the third item was action taken by the Evaluation and Oversight Committee, and the committee recommended that we hire fine grade people to do an executive search for the clerk to council position.
You heard the committee's recommendation for that item. Discussion. There being no discussion, I'll ask Ms. Owen to call the roll for that item regarding the motion, the recommendation of the committee.
Malinowski,
No.
Dickerson, McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Kennedy, Manning,
Abstain.
Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And the third item, we'll take it up when we get to executive session. Is that correct, Ms. Newton?
Yes, sir. That concludes my report.
Thank you. And now brings us to other items. First other item is the 17A, fiscal year 2021 CDBG and Home Annual Action Plan Budget. Mr. Brown.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of council. It's Clayton Voignier again, Director of Community Plan and Development. For this item, staff is recommending approval of the FY 2021 Annual Action Plan budget and projects as presented in the agenda briefing document, or CDBG and home funds that the county is allocated on an annual basis as an entitlement community. While council previously approved utilization of the CDBG portion of the allocation to aid in the county's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, staff has not identified additional CDBG eligible projects or programs beyond those currently in progress to prevent, prepare, and respond to COVID-19, which already have identified funding sources. Staff has identified other new and continuing CDBG eligible program needs as reflected in the proposed budgets for CDBG and home. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Chair, I entertain a motion reference staff recommendation regarding item 17A, CDBG and Home Fund Annual Plan Budget. Motion.
Move to approve.
Motion for approval. Is there a second? Is there a second?
For discussion.
Item 17A, been moving and properly second discussion. There's no discussion.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
You
I'll
recognize.
wait till after Mr. Jackson. Go ahead.
Ms. Jackson has no comment.
Ms. Myers, you recognize?
Just the same question that I had about the Blue Ribbon Project with regard to what is clearly large expenditures of funds. I understand that the staff had generated, a set of projects, some of them based on different departmental concerns as highlighted and bubbled up to the surface. But how much broad-based community input have we sought and have we received for this plan? Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair, that was a question.
I'm sorry. What was the question again, Ms. Myers?
How much broad-based community input and assistance have we sought in crafting this plan? In other words, have we gone back to the same well, or have we cast a broader net? Thank you.
Can someone from staff respond to Ms. Myers' question?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. We have not yet held a public comment period and a public hearing yet for this plan. All of these projects have been consistently funded year over year, with the exception of the sewer pipe installation project. I don't have the details of that particular project in front of me, but I believe that has had some public input as far as that project goes individually. As far as the other projects, we will be holding a public hearing and a public comment period prior to submitting this to HUD for approval.
Okay. Any further questions?
Will it come back
You
to
recognize
us?
Myers.
I'm sorry, I apologize, Mr. Chair. I thought I still had the floor. Will it come back to us after those comment periods? And will we then be made aware of whatever it is that, that those comments have produced in the form of changes?
That will be part of our submission to HUD. I'm happy to provide that to council for information. What will be coming back to you primarily are particular projects whenever we've identified the entities that will be receiving some of these funds, in particular the public service projects, as well as the community housing development organizations. So those will be coming back individually to council.
So I raised this question again too, because about 7 months ago and during our budget cycle, I consistently said, can someone please give us a total for what is the annual allocation of CDBG funds and the uses that we make of them? And there was not there was never a point where there was an answer other than check the website. My concern with asking that and raising this is, again, there are communities across Richland County that largely are left out of these very critical conversations. That budget itself is quite a large budget, and the projects are very significant. We have large parts of our county that could use some assistance from these CDBG funds and who are not being asked to give input on the front end. By the time you go back to these communities and say, here is our plan, what do you think? There already is a plan that is 90% down the road to approval. I'm asking that we involve more of the county's stakeholders, more broadly defined, in these discussions so that they're not left out of these multi-million-dollar year-over-year projects, because we have large parts of our community that really do need assistance. Thank you. So same comment from before. Please cast a wider net. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I support.
I have Malinowski and McBride and Dickerson.
That was just a point of.
Go ahead, Ms. Dickerson.
Said I support Ms. Myers' comments.
Go ahead, Ms. Dickerson, make your brief comment there.
I just said I just want to go on record as supporting Mrs. Myers. Ms. Myers' comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Malinowski, then Ms. McBride.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Voignier, on page 286 of our agenda, under your top two items, actually maybe the top three under the CDBG budget. Operation One Touch minor home repair. Taking off on Ms. Myers' comments on who actually gets to give us the input. Can you explain to me on the Operation One Touch minor home repair? Explain how the program works and how it's determined who will actually qualify and get these funds.
Yes, sir. I can give a sort of a broad description. The Operation One Touch is generally for projects under 15,000 that homeowners apply for those projects, and they are assessed and evaluated based on their income eligibility as well as the type of project. So that budget is based on, I believe, at roughly 15,000, we estimate, I believe that's 15 to 20 individual homes that would benefit from that program throughout a single fiscal year.
Okay, and how about the next one, the public service project? Same question.
The public service projects, we typically set aside 15% of the budget for those. That is an application process that is underway right now. That's a minimum application of 35,000 for a project that we receive from the community, and a maximum of 100,000. But that's evaluated based on the goals of the program and several other factors that they have to meet, both financial and programmatic. And a internal committee will be evaluating those proposals. Typically, we have not actually published the application process, but we did recently do a news release, and we are also partnering with our Government Community Services Department to cast that wider net so we can get additional applications in for this for those projects.
Okay, thank you. And my last question for right now will be your program administration costs. There must be something that I'm not seeing somewhere here, because you've got cannot exceed 20%. 20% of the total of the two figures above for each of those programs is only slightly under $94,000, and you've got 325,000 plus there. Explain that, please.
That should be 20% of the total allocation.
Which is, okay, the 1.6 million?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, sir. I'm done.
Thank you, Ms. McBride.
Yeah, I just want to follow up and agree with Ms. Myers and Ms. Dickerson. And you know how often I push this in terms of making sure that we are very inclusive in addressing the needs of our most vulnerable citizens. In terms of the public service projects and the Operation and Touch Minor Home Repair, as well as the other ones, these decisions are made by an in-house review team?
The public service projects are, they make a recommendation. That recommendation comes back to council at some point, whenever those projects are selected by the internal committee. For the Operation One Touch, those are individual applications that we receive on a first come, first served basis, assuming that they qualify, their homes qualify, and they are income eligible.
So those, okay, on a first come, first served basis.
Yes.
And the others, the recommendations are made from the staff, which generally we just ask a few questions and approve because we don't have a whole lot of information about them. I guess with the, I think you did a news announcement last week about funding that was available. Of course, I really had no idea other than the title of what funding was available and how to apply and the other things, criteria that would be needed for that. I think that because I have to speak for myself, but as I talk to other council members, they seem not to have much more knowledge than me regarding the overall budget and how the funds are spent. there appears to be a need for some transparency with this and more accountability as we try to change the way we're doing business and be more accountable and more inclusive of all the communities and get different stakeholders involved. So I would like for us to just look at the overall process in terms of the methods we're using to make decisions, and also involvement of both the community and the council. Thank you.
Thank you. We're still on item 17A. Did we take I know it was moved in second. Any further discussion? Ms. Only, can you call the roll for item 17? I think it's 17A we're on.
Yes, sir. Malinowski,
Yes.
Dickerson,
Yes.
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Kennedy, Manning, Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you. That brings us to
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I would ask that that item be reconsidered.
I make a
motion reconsideration.
I made a motion to reconsider.
It's moved reconsideration. A second.
Yeah, someone second.
I second.
It's moving proper second reconsideration. Item 17A. Ms. Only, can call the roll?
Sir. Malinowski,
No.
Dickerson,
No.
McBride,
No.
No.
Livingston,
No.
Kennedy, Manning, Jackson,
No.
Myers,
No.
Newton.
No.
Motion fails.
Thank you. That brings us to item 17B. CDBG, that's DR rehabilitation project change order. Staff will speak brief for that one.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. Clayton Voignier again, Community Planning and Development Director. For this item, staff is recommending approval of a second change order for one of the county's rehabilitation properties in the Housing Disaster Recovery Program located at 216 Raintree Drive, totaling $11,079.86. All change orders greater than 25% of the original contract amount for CDBG DR funds must be approved by council. The purpose of this change order is to address a structural issue that could not be identified until work had begun on the first change order. The structural issue presents a safety concern that must be repaired based on the county's housing standards to construct safe, sanitary, and secure homes in accordance with our CDBG DR action plan. Failing to complete this work may cause the structure to fail in the future with further damage to the property and possibly the homeowner. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. You heard the recommendation for item 17B. Chair, take a motion. Chair, take a motion for staff recommendation.
Move to approve.
Motion for approval. Is there a second? Livingston, second. Motion moving properly second. Discussion. There'll be no discussion. Ms. Owen, we call the roll for item 17B.
Malinowski,
No.
Dickerson,
No.
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Kennedy, Manning, Jackson,
No.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We removed item 17C from the agenda. That brings us to item
Mr. Chair.
17.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt. We would ask for a reconsideration on that motion as well. On that item.
Chair, take a motion reconsideration on item 17B. We won't get back into next month. Is there a motion for a reconsideration item 17B? Well, once again, there's a motion for reconsideration item 17B.
Move to reconsider.
Motion for reconsideration, is there a second? I'll second that motion for reconsideration. It's moving properly second. Discussion. Ms. Rob, call the roll for reconsideration item 17B.
Malinowski,
Yes.
Dickerson,
Yes.
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
No.
Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
No.
Can Mr. Manning vote?
Mr. Manning, yes, you can.
Yes.
Okay, the motion's back on the floor.
The motion, that item was, well, it wasn't reconsidered. Well, it wasn't reconsidered, I'm sorry, reconsideration passed.
It did.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Manning, you recognize.
Thank you. So the motion passed, but the reconsideration did not, so we have it back on the floor. I would find it very helpful personally if somebody who voted no originally on the motion that's again before us because of reconsideration, if they could state clearly for me to understand why they're opposed.
I can do that, Mr. Chair.
You recognize Mr. Malinowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Manning, the original contract amount of $21,500. Now I realize that items can be found after they begin work, but there was the first change order was in excess of 39,000 compared to the 21,500 contract, which was 183% increased to the amount being paid. This second change order requested is over $11,000, which is 51% of the original approval. So we've got an original contract awarded in the amount of $21,500 with two change orders in excess of $50,000. No telling what these folks are going to come up with the third time they go in there, since third time's the charm. And I realize what Mr. Voignier's saying, that we've got to leave these places in a decent, livable state and safe. But seems to me, when you were part of the problem to begin with, because when they went in to look for this, they found that a pipe had been leaking in the wall, and due to an individual not attending to that obvious home maintenance need, it created a worse problem, and that therefore brought about the additional change orders. So we're fixing items that you or I would have to fix on our own if we just take a look at things and do your normal home maintenance. And for those reasons, I'm against it.
Any further discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Malinowski. Yes, Mr. Chair. So if staff could help me understand if in reconsideration, if it does not pass this next time around, are there going to be other options, or will it just be this is off the table and the things that they've reported that need fixed, whether it was because the people living there or whatever action or inaction of the staff that brought us to the point of asking for these change orders? I mean, so I understand it all gets fixed if we vote yes. If we don't, I'm not quite clear what that picture looks like.
Mr. Manning, I'll try to address that. If this does not pass then obviously the work will not be completed. And what will be left is the sagging floor joists underneath the den. And so that there's a potential for some structural failure there in the future, which if we do the work, it could fall under the warranty period because they are offered a 1-year warranty period. But there could also be some other it could cause some other damages to the home, or possibly, the homeowner could be injured if the floor joists were to fail completely. So I don't know the extent of the liability for the county in that situation. That would be something I would have to confer with legal about.
Okay, so with that, if you can help me understand, in essence, what I see now is you as the county staff are bringing to the governing body, asking for taxpayer money to be used to rectify the situation. Is the government that is asking the council for this money, is there in some way that the staff of the county allowed this to happen or didn't see this coming? In other words, how help me understand as a person voting as the governing body that it's the responsibility of us as stewards of the taxpayers to make this government expenditure.
Oh, well, the responsibility is placed due to the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Committee as far as change orders go. So because of that, that is why the item is before council to make the decision. I will point out that this is disaster recovery funding. This is grant funding. This isn't county dollars. And so, the purpose of those funds is for some of these, for actually this purpose. So we did include in our action plan that we would, and we said to HUD that we would construct homes that are safe, sanitary, and secure. So we could be viewed as not doing our obligation under the action plan if these types of change orders are not approved.
Okay. So I guess the question I have about that is, do we have any idea where the federal government gets money?
I'm not sure I understand your question, Mr. Manning. I'm sorry.
Well, you were kind of saying that it didn't really matter to a taxpayer that lives in my district because this wasn't Richland County tax money. It was the federal government money. And I was just wondering where they get their money from if that doesn't involve taxpayers in my district. I'll retract the question. Thank you.
I have Newton, Malinowski, and McBride.
Mr. Chair, I would
Thank
draw.
you, Mr. Chair.
I'll put my hand down. Mr. Manning just asked the question I was going to ask. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Newton and McBride.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Voignier, I was just wondering, looking at these change orders and the size of the change orders, I understand from reading the document that these are things that were, I guess, discovered later. I guess my question is the only remedy that we use our CDBG funds to pay for this, or is there any, I don't know that liability is the right word, but perhaps responsibility on the part of the vendor that we were working with to have discovered this earlier? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, Miss Newton. I'm not sure I heard your question very well. If you could repeat it, I'm sorry.
Absolutely, and I'll try to ask it better while I'm repeating it. my question is that the reason that this change order is before us is that there's substantive work that needs to be done that wasn't identified before. And my question is, has there been a determination that these are things that the vendor that we were working with should have known before the change order came to us? Is my question clear now?
Yes, ma'am. No, we have not concluded that the contractor should have been able to see this. The purpose of the original change order was to replace the joists that were rotted out in the kitchen when they started, as those repairs were related to flood damage. And so because additional work needed to be done underneath the flooring, that was why the purpose of the second change order. But when they opened up the kitchen, they would not anticipate to see under the floor without beginning the work the other half of the house that contained the floor joists because of the way the ventilation system and the crawl space was configured. So that is what our implementing contractor and our subject matter experts have concluded.
Thank you.
Mr. Livingston, I have a question. Oh, sorry.
McBride, Manning, Malinowski, and Myers.
Mr. Chair, did we not approve the staff recommendations for the change order? Just want clarification.
Yes, you did, but you reconsidered it.
Okay, thank
Back
you.
on the table.
Didn't the motion to reconsider fail?
It passed.
Or the motion to reconsider passed?
Yes.
Oh. Well, if that's the case,
Myers, and then Manning, then Malinowski.
I'm sort of confused with that.
You said Myers, sir?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, did you say Myers? Okay.
Yes.
So on this contract, does anyone in the staff have any idea what the value of the home is?
No, I don't have that information in front of me. No, ma'am.
So the total, as Mr. Malinowski correctly pointed out, of all the change orders would be about $72,000, correct?
That's correct. Our analysis that we do is that once it reaches a certain point, our grant size limit for rehabilitations is $90,000. So once it exceeds that amount, we would make the decision that we would have had to rebuild the home.
Well, that's exactly what I'm getting at. That you've gone exactly where I'm going. That we are close to on this one doing what we're calling a kitchen repairs to the kitchen floor. We basically built a house. We built houses in Richland County for less than this amount of money. And to Mr. Manning's question, that is my concern. Thank you.
I'd just like to respond to that. Our grant size limit for rehabilitations is $90,000. We are not at that $90,000 point. All of our rebuilds.
No, I understood that, Mr.
Okay.
Voignier. I appreciate and understand that, but I just think that we're at about $75,000, and to repair a floor and rehab a kitchen, I think it's quite a kitchen. Thank you.
Mr. Manning, your hand still up, Mr. Malinowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have a couple questions at this point. One would be, Mr. Voignier, about how much time did the Blue Ribbon Committee debate or have light conversation, deliberation on this matter?
This particular change order?
Yes. You said that this is coming as a recommendation from them.
The policy regarding change orders that are greater than 25%, they established that policy and council approved that policy so that any change orders that exceed 25% go directly to council and do not need to go to the Blue Ribbon Committee.
Oh, so So this particular matter is not a recommendation for approval by council on this specific case.
No, this is a staff recommendation.
Okay.
Please put me down at when in appropriate time.
I'll yield at this point.
I have Malinowski, then Dickerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Malinowski, have you exceeded your 2 times?
No, ma'am, this is my second time. I'm glad you're keeping an eye on that. If I have an automobile accident, Mr. Voignier, and it damages the hood on my car, and the insurance company says, okay, we'll buy you a new hood. And in the process of removing the hood, they look in there and they say, wow, you've got a really bad oil leak here on your engine. Are they going to fix the oil leak too? Absolutely not. That's my responsibility because I allowed that to happen. And that's what I believe we have here. I don't understand why we can't tell the person that, hey, we'll repair what's needed based on the hazard that took place. But items that were neglect due to your irresponsibility, we're not paying for. And that's why I'm against it. Thank you.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair.
Dickerson, I think you were next.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'm going to treat this matter like I'm treating 17C. There was lots of questions about how some of these items got on this agenda without going through committees, etc. So I'm probably not, I can't, that's why I voted not to reconsider this because this item, in my opinion, like a couple of them, like the one I withdrew, are on their staff recommendations, but we addressed some of them from staff recommendations without them going through a committee. And I think this is one of them. And so we have not had, in my opinion, I have not had the opportunity to look at it in its entirety so that I can feel comfortable about spending this kind of money from somebody who took on a project and did not see a lot of the, probably the discrepancies that, that were probably associated with this. So that's why I voted not to reconsider it because I need to have more information. I did not realize the reconsideration passed. So if the reconsideration passes, I don't see why we're having the discussion.
Let me ask Ms. Only a question for clarification. Ms. Only, do we have a motion on this item? I know it was reconsidered, but
we already passed.
Yes, sir. There's no motion on the floor.
There's not a motion on the floor. I didn't think so.
But what did we just vote to reconsider?
This item, that's why it's back on the floor. When you reconsider an item and the reconsideration passes, that means you're reconsidering it again. So it's back where it was.
Oh.
So Chair, entertain a motion reference item 17B.
Mr. Chair, I move that we send this to the DNS committee.
I'll second that.
It was moving proper second, send this to the DNS committee. Any further discussion? If not, Ms.
Mr. Chair.
Roll for that motion.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Newton, you recognize for discussion.
I don't want to extend this conversation, but I did just want to clarify if this is a time-sensitive matter, and if so, if we needed to move to send it to DNS for next Tuesday, or if this was something that could wait until we came back.
Ms. Newton, I would say that this is a time-sensitive matter as the homeowner is not currently in the home and we are expending funds to relocate the homeowner on a weekly basis.
It's gonna pass this.
Okay, thank you. Then I would move to amend the motion to send it to next week's DNS.
Mr. Chairman, as the maker of the motion, that is really what my intent was. But then I also need to ask, are you intending to schedule a special call meeting following the public zoning for any items that would come out of DNS and A&F, as we've done in the past, that would need taken care of before the August break?
Yeah, that is a conversation I plan to have with the county administrator to see whether or not any of those items need to be moved forward and considered crucial items to move forward, yeah.
Okay, well, my motion, I'm sorry I wasn't clear, is for it to be the DNS. And I mean, part of the reason why we usually don't do that is, straight from this meeting, that meeting, but we already have all this information in the packet. So it's not that it's going to take a lot of staff prep to be ready for it. It'll just be for them to explain why that's their recommendation to the DNS committee. So I'm ready to vote.
So the motion is to forward this to the DNS committee of next week. It's a move and proper second. Ms. Malinowski, you need to recognize?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Voignier, you stated that the homeowner is currently somewhere else and we're paying for that somewhere else. Well, what happens if the council refuses to move forward with this next change order? What happens to the homeowner? They go back into the house, don't they?
I'll have to confer with our contractor to determine if they are still willing to complete the first change order and then leave the, discontinue work on the home. But no work is currently being done because of awaiting the approval of the change order for this particular item. So if it ends up not passing, then I'm assuming they would finish the work and the homeowner would move back in at that point.
Well, now I don't understand, if there's work to be done from the first change order, why isn't it being done?
The floor joists are basically sister and they're connected. We would not tear up the other side of the house just to get underneath the crawl space to repair the floor joists. Essentially putting in a floor on one side and then going to the floor on the other. But that's my assumption of the matter. But I would have to confer with our contractor to determine what the specific project steps would be.
Okay, if you would please have that at the time of the DNS committee, please, sir. And I hope we're not putting this person up the same place the Tetra Tech person was at $90,000 a year. Thank you.
Any further discussion about the motion to forward this to the DNS committee on next Tuesday?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a substitute motion.
Go ahead, sir.
My substitute motion is that we approve this change order. And if it gets seconded, I'd like to address that for a minute.
I'll second it.
I don't know what in the world's gone wrong here. Something is really, really messed up. And I hate the fact that I'm part of a body that's having this in front of us with this all so messed up. But at the same time, we have a citizen that's out of their home with a contractor ready to go to work on their home that they're out of. And I'm now making that motion and I'm going to vote for it because I think it's just unfair for whoever this citizen is and whatever went wrong and what went wrong step by step by step by step that has us as a governing body with a staff that we depend on. Somehow tonight, I feel like we're in a really, really bad situation, but I'm not in a bad situation like I'm out of my house with a government that somehow did not seamlessly get to the point to where this should have been an easy decision. It either shouldn't have been here as a staff recommendation, or if it was, we really should have been in a position that this should be a no-brainer and a rubber stamp. I'm very, very disappointed in that. I'm going to have to hold my nose and vote for my substitute motion, but but I just can't see us, in my view, at this point, just having a citizen's life further disrupted because of the situation I feel like we've found ourselves in tonight.
Mr. Chair.
I have Ms. McBride.
Mr. Chair, I agree with Mr. Manning, and it is no way that I could not vote for that citizen to be continued to be staying in a hotel and not living in their home. And I just think I think that it's our responsibility based on that we started the program and they thought that their house would be completed, and now they're in a hotel and they end up going into a home unfit to live. So I would have to approve the staff recommendations based on that.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Again, what's your pleasure? The substitute motion is for item 17B, and substitute motion is for approval. I'm gonna ask Ms. Owen to call the roll for the substitute motion, item 17B.
Malinowski,
I have to agree with Mr. Manning, yes.
Dickerson,
I have to agree with Mr. Manning and Mr. Malinowski, yes.
McBride,
I have to agree with me and Mr. Manning, yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Manning,
I'll vote yes since everybody else did.
Jackson,
I am concerned that this is not the real issue, and we are resolving one homeowner's problem tonight because of the negligence of staff and outside contractors. And I'm afraid we're about to set a very bad precedent so that contractors can come in the future and do the very same thing for areas that are not our responsibility, that were before the flood, and simply identify them and get it for free, while we are simply saying we want to make sure homeowners get back in their homes in a prompt manner. I realize you're asking for a vote, but this bothers me greatly. And I think that to have a contractor to be able to gouge us like this and treat this like a money pit is a bigger issue for me than it is for having homeowners being treated fairly. For that, with all of that, I say no, my vote is no.
okay. Myers,
I agree with Mr. Jackson. I'm looking at these pictures. I am troubled because I think that even after this work is done, you will have virtually $100,000 kitchen in a home that, the rest of it may not even equal that value. I find it shocking that we would be putting this much money into a kitchen and that it came to us at this point. And, I guess I would ask, like Mr. Jackson, did we ask another contractor for a separate bid? I know we're in a contract with Tetra Tech, but this seems extraordinary. It does not seem normal. It is literally 4 times the original contemplated investment. And I too feel bad that the homeowner is in a hotel or in another place outside their home, but they're in a safe place. And I agree with Mr. Jackson that the precedent that we're about to set will bust every CDBG budget that we have set. So for those reasons, and because of the precedent, and because I think we are dealing with the wrong problem on this vote, I have to vote no.
Mr. Chair, can I change my vote?
If you wish to, you can.
I wish to change my vote to no.
Mr. Chair, I also wish to change it after hearing those comments.
Mr. Chair, this is not a precedent. This has been going on for a long time and we've just been passing them. I think that it is time to correct it, but I don't think we need to use this person to make that correction. And we're not saving resources because we're still paying for the hotel stay. So I think we need to put in place policies and mechanisms and tracking systems to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But I don't think we should punish the citizen.
Mr. Chair, I was thinking about changing my vote, but I'm not going to, because if this is setting a precedent for staff to continue to let this happen, then I don't think that's setting a precedent. It seems to me like that's what's got us here. And I'm hoping that this whole discussion is being heard very clearly by Mr. Brown, particularly in light of the earlier report we had from the evaluation committee, that we're very unpleased about all this. And as I said, I'm holding my nose, making and voting for this substitute motion for the sake of a citizen. But I sure hope that this precedent is not allowed to continue, not be set, but be allowed to continue. And that I'm just not willing for this one person, because it's been allowed to get where it is tonight, that we're going to start fixing this while they're left dangling, when they could have read this agenda just like everybody else and seen this is what the staff was going to recommend and have some sense of false hope. So if staff is given, if staff's put us in a bad place, in my opinion, which they have, I'm just not willing to let this citizen get caught up as a cog in something really bad. And I don't believe it's setting a precedent. I believe it's getting the attention of our administration that this has been ongoing and it needs to stop, and it needs to stop tonight, but not at the peril of whoever this citizen is that's got caught up in this web of dysfunction, if that's even a harsh enough word. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
I have Malinowski and Dickerson.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think it's actually terrible that while we have someone staying, I guess, Mr. Voignier, are they in a hotel or just in another type of a housing?
Mr. Malinowski, I can't comment on the specific homeowner, but they are either staying in a hotel or they are staying with family members. And either way, there would be continuation of some level of funding as we fund a certain amount for their stay and their storage of items in either case.
Okay, so we don't know where they're staying. We don't know what it may be costing the county or what it's costing the citizen. And we don't even know, because I asked a previous question as to if we don't approve this, will the citizen be told, okay, you got to go back to your house and you have to fix what's left to be fixed? We don't even have that answer. We don't have any answers at all as to what happens to the citizen in this matter. Seems like there should be a playbook there that says, if this isn't passed, this is what happens next. And Mr. Manning said, staff doesn't have any of this because it's gotten so to the point where it seems like it's always a rubber stamp. So there's no concern for what costs may be or what happens to the individual if it's turned down, because we always just approve them. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm done.
Ms. Dickerson.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Malinowski. The reason I pulled back on my vote, I was really impressed with what Mr. Chip Jackson said earlier, and also what Ms. Myers said regarding this. You know, the cost for the repair more than the value of the house, and that is my concern. What is, and I think this is what I asked earlier. How does this item get on the agenda? Some of these items, if we could have vetted them in a committee, would have been much better than coming here tonight and trying to vet them tonight. So by putting them on the agenda tonight without them going through any kind of committee, is really detrimental, and that's how come I cannot support it. And I would support if another week, in my opinion, is not going to make that much of a difference, in my opinion. And then if we have to call a special call meeting immediately after to address this, after we complete the committee meetings, then I think this would, in my opinion, would be the most appropriate way to manage this matter. We need to know how much the value of that house is, and all of those things need to be considered. I don't see why paying that much money for a house that probably less than what we are, the change order amount is going to add up to be. So that is my concern. So that's why I cannot support it. And I don't know how long these people have been out the house. I I don't remember reading how long they have been relocated. So I think it needs to go back to Mr. Manning's original motion. I think this is a substitute motion where it goes to the committee so we can vet it and get all the answers and make sure what we do, we're doing it correctly, and we are doing a fiduciary responsibility to make sure we get them taken care of correctly. Now, if we have to get them another house, then we need to look at that as well, if their cost is above what we are allowing at this point. So that's my concern. I can't support.
Chairman,
Point of order.
I'm gonna, point of order, I recognize point of order.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. We were in the process of actually calling the roll for a vote, and then it turned into discussion. So it sounds like there might be subsequent motions after this one, but we were voting.
And I would agree, and we'll go back to the roll call for the voting.
so I'd like to have a point of order too, sir.
You recognize a point of order.
Since we've not had the vote completed, I would like to remove my substitute motion.
So you need a second of that, I'll second it. If you,
That is out of order. Once a motion is approved and voted on, it's the council's business at that particular point, and the person does not have the authority to withdraw the motion.
well, how far
We voted on. We're in the middle of vote.
are we with the
You
voting?
still cannot withdraw it.
Okay, so have the voting start? Ms. Newton said the voting had started.
My ruling is, and according to Robert rules, is that the motion cannot be removed at this point.
Wait a minute, Mr. Livingston. My question is, Ms. Newton raised the question, said that we were in the middle of voting on Mr. Manning's substitute motion. I'm asking the question, if that is the case, where are we? Can you tell me where
That was the point I made. We're going to do the roll call for the vote and then move on.
I thought we had, sound like Ms. Newton said we started the roll call.
Yes, we have. I said we'll
Mr.
continue the roll call.
I was the last person to vote.
I'm confused.
We will continue the roll call.
Ms. Newton,
Well, can we find out where we are now? What the votes were?
Once Ms. Newton.
Soon as Ms. Roberts finishes, I'm asking her that question. I'm sorry.
Oh, you have to quit.
It's Miss Only.
we're missing is Ms. Newton's vote.
So Ms. Newton,
We're not missing it. I said no.
Ms. Newton said no. So Ms. Owner, do you have the vote for that motion?
Yes, sir. It failed.
Thank you.
The substitute motion that was by Mr. Manning, which was to move forward for approval, failed. Now that brings us back to the original motion, which was to refer it to the committee meeting.
DNS committee.
That's correct. So that is the motion before us.
Okay, and I second that motion.
It's been moved and properly second already. It's the one before us for discussion. Back to that motion. If there's no discussion on that motion, I'll ask Ms. Owner to call for the vote.
Sir. Malinowski,
Yes.
Dickerson,
Yes.
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Kennedy, Manning,
Yes.
Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes, but I also think Councilman Walker is here. Was he called in the roll call?
He was not. Mr. Walker,
Walker is present and votes yes. Thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you. It passes.
Thank you. Thank you. That brings us to item, and welcome, Mr. Walker. That brings us to item 17D. Administration.
Yes, sir. We're going to have Assistant to County Administrator, Mr. Shea Myers, address that item, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman Livingston, Vice Chair Myers, and members of council. Beginning on page 383 of your council agenda is the final pandemic relief grant update and recommendations. As indicated during the July 14th meeting, the grant closed for applications at 11:59 p.m. on June 30th, and the report provided within that particular agenda included demographic information for all applications received by the grant's closing. Included within tonight's agenda on page 385 is a report and shared with members of the council via email on Thursday, July 16th, is a list of those nonprofits who have been approved by the council to receive grant funding. Tonight, staff is seeking a motion of your approval for the final round of recommended small business grant recipients as listed on page 394 of your agenda. Demographic information relative to those recommended does begin on page 388 and conclude on 93.
You heard the staff report and recommendation for approval. Discussion, Ms. Malinowski, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Myers, has it been determined for certain that the individuals that we're approving have only applied, will only be receiving funds from Richland County?
Yes, sir. The grantees are those who have applied have to sign and indicate that they are only receiving funds from Richland County. That information was included as a part of their application submission process. And if they do receive other funding, that they have to deny ours. We have had one potential recipient already withdraw their application based upon that particular requirement.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Further discussion.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. McBride, you recognize.
Ms. Myers, with the organizations, am I available, or if I needed help, can I apply for assistance from these organizations now?
Yes, ma'am, you may.
Okay, and we have informed the public that they can apply.
I have requested through our PIO director and through Mr. Brown that we post that information on our website to be publicly available to let citizens know that the funds have been dispersed once they are dispersed from the county.
Is there any other means of informing the citizens, particularly many do not have computers, as to these funds being available and how they can apply?
I have requested through the PIO director that the public be made aware that these funds are available. I do not know which means she plans to use to do so, but I have requested that the information be publicly available.
Please let me know how that's going to be done.
I will request that she provide that information. Yes, ma'am.
Under the small business fund distribution, thank you for the report, identifying the data requested. The only way I can't use it, it helps me some, but not a lot, because I would need to know how many you said. I don't have the page. I think it's 392. So it's in fund distribution. You have the associations and the percentage, like the minority, the percentage was 36.8%. I think in Richland County, we're probably 50% or over, but I don't know how many applications were received.
That information was included in last week's report. We had over 400, I think we had 490 applications, of which 150 were incomplete.
No. Based on the categories that you have.
That information, you want to know how many applicants were minority or minority?
Yeah, and where I did, because when I'm having to jump from page to page to report, I can't consistently look and find the information. Then I can do an analysis, but like it is. But I thank you for, for providing the information, but in a more systematic form would help me with my analysis. Thank you.
So just to make sure that I am clear on your request, are you requesting an aggregate report of all of the small businesses that have applied and their indication of their association?
No, I just wanted to know, you have minority, you had 36.8%, right?
Yes, ma'am, for this particular recommendation, yes.
Okay, I would just like to know the total applications received in the various areas.
Yes, ma'am, I'll get that information to you.
Any further discussion?
I just, Mr. Chair, may I say one thing?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm looking at it. I'm very disappointed in what I'm seeing. It just is very disappointing to me. But this is the recommendation from the committee.
Yes, ma'am.
And Mr. Chair, didn't you approve for a couple of council members to be on that committee?
I sent out an email to council members asking for.
Do we have any council members on that committee?
No.
Mr. Chair.
You were asking whether or not you want to serve or not, though.
Oh, yeah, that's, I remember that.
Mr. Chair?
Ms. McBride, you recognize?
Yeah. Given the synergy of the council and everything that's going on right now, I decided not to serve on the committee because I didn't want to politicize it or had it taken as being politicized anyway. But I would have been glad to monitor the process, but I did not want to vote on any applications.
Well, Miss McBride, I think that's what I'm trying to say. I did not submit an application to serve on this committee for those reasons, but I'm looking at it, and I mean, just what I'm looking at, I'm just not pleased with the selection. And I had the entire list, the entire list. I think Ms. Myers sent me this list some time ago, and looking at, you know, the ones that I'm seeing that have been selected, and the amounts is just very disturbing to me. Thank you very much.
Any further discussion? All right, the motion on the floor is of the committee's recommendation regarding the grant relief. If there's no further discussion, I'll ask Ms. Owens to call the roll.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Ms. Myers, you recognize.
We did not yet receive a motion relative to the staff committee's recommendation for these particular.
I thought I had a motion. Thank you, ma'am. Entertain the motion. Entertain the motion to approve the staff recommendation. So moved by.
I move to approve.
And second. Further discussion.
I can't support it.
There being no further discussion, Ms. Owen, can you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Malinowski,
No.
Dickerson,
No.
McBride,
I'm going to approve it, vote yes, but I don't agree with the staff recommendations, but I know that there are so many people out there in need, so I'm going to vote yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
Kennedy, Manning,
Yes.
Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Let me figure out where I am.
Mr. Chair,
I bring the items.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Pardon me, before you move to the last item, item 17E, I realized that on the report out from the evaluation and ad hoc committee meeting, while we voted to approve using Find Great People for a search, we did not reconsider that motion. And I wondered if we could reconsider that motion now.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
You take
Yes.
it.
Yes. You
Can
recognize
we-
the point of order.
Can we reconsider the matter before us, before moving back to Ms. Newton? Ms. Newton, I have no disagreement with reconsidering that, but this one's still open.
Yeah, we can do that. It didn't. Yes. That.
Okay, but I'd move to reconsider the grants as outlined.
It's moved. It's moved to second reconsideration. I'll second it.
I'll second.
It's moving proper second reconsideration for item 17D, so they can move forward with folks getting the relief. Ms. Only, can you call the roll for reconsideration for item 16D?
Yes, sir. Malinowski,
Yes.
Dickerson,
Yes.
McBride, Livingston,
No.
Walker,
No.
Kennedy, Manning,
I don't think so.
Jackson,
No.
Myers,
No.
Newton.
No.
Motion fails.
Thank you. Ms. Newton, you recognize for the item that you mentioned in your report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess according to our enumeration, it would be item 16.53, which was for fine. Sure, that we use Find Great People to do a search to find a clerk to council. I move to reconsider.
Second.
It's moving proper second for reconsideration. I'll ask Ms. Nolan to call roll for reconsideration.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Malinowski,
Yes.
Dickerson, McBride,
No.
Livingston,
No.
Walker,
No.
Kennedy, Manning,
No.
Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
No.
Newton.
No.
Motion fails.
Okay. Now we're to item 16E, Richland County Fiber Broadband Partnership for Southeast Richland County. Staff?
Yes, sir, Mr.
Mr.
Chair.
Chairman, I move to approve if Ms. Myers is going to second that motion.
Ms. Myers was going to excitedly move to approve, so I will second your motion. Yes.
I have a motion. I have a motion for
Mr. Chair,
approval
Mr.
and a
Chair,
second discussion.
Yes, let's have that be a Ms. Myers motion with me second, please.
Thank you, Mr. Manning. This has been an exciting process. Thank you. I would move to approve. Mr. Chair, may I also speak to this for just a moment?
You can speak to it and then following you'll be Malinowski. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, thanks to the administrator and the staff who worked to find this provider to actually build out broadband in the entirety of the southeast of Richland County at no cost to Richland County. I note in the staff's briefing document that the staff has said the only thing that this company that's going to invest $7 to $10 million in building out fiber in the ground, all they've asked is if and when we build a building that they be given a customer-facing space in the building with deferred rent. There's somewhere in this briefing document where it says that they've asked for free rent space. That is not consistent with my understanding of what they've asked for, nor is it consistent with the sentence preceding it. Deferred rent is not free. And I think that this is an exciting thing. They haven't asked for any FILO or any kind of abatements. This is exciting. I think we ought to enthusiastically support it. And if we build a building, a small space to have a customer-facing spot for a time with deferred rent doesn't seem to be a lot because they're going to ultimately pay the rent. It says deferred. So I'm excited about it. Thank you, staff. Finally, some excellent news we can share with our constituents. Thank you.
Any further? I have Malinowski, Newton, and Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like some additional information because of what Ms. Myers just said. I mean, I'm looking at the bottom of page 395 and the fiscal impact, and it says both finance and budget departments are concerned about giving a for-profit organization rent-free space in a taxpayer-funded facility. So we've got two of our departments are understanding it is free space. So I'd like somebody to address that, number one. Number two, is it legally allowable even for us to put a private company in government facilities with deferred rent? Number three, these folks aren't doing it totally free. If we get any grant funds, it says that they want to have those grant funds to defray their costs for constructing the system. I have a legal question on that too, if that would be allowable. It's kind of like that these folks came along and they said, we'll do this for you. And then once they got the nod to move ahead, all of a sudden they wanted the rules changed regarding what they will do and what they want Richland County to do. So I'd like those answers, please, from somebody on staff.
Mr. Malinowski, this is the county administrator, sir. May I be recognized, Mr. Chair?
You recognize responding to Mr. Malinowski's questions, yes.
Yes, sir, Mr. Malinowski. So, and Ms. Myers and Mr. Manning were enthusiastic in approving the matter, and that's great. I was going to communicate to the body that when this initial item came before the council, there were some different considerations at the time. Specifically, we were talking about doing some joint trenching for the laying of conduit and also doing our sewer and water lines. Well, those things have changed. So those requests associated with that are different. So those things are not even in consideration. So there are just a couple of things that are a little bit different. For example, and we do have, just by the way of council, we do have Ms. Carla French, who is the president and chief operating officer of True Vista, available. At the time, we did not have the name of the provider to offer to council. So tonight, we're providing that information to the council that True Vista is the organization who has come forward and said that we are willing to do this project. They have not given us any conditions, and Ms. French can speak to that, by which the project is contingent upon. They did say that if the county does have access to funds that could be used, then absolutely they're willing, would like to be able to have access to that if that's possible. They did also say if the county has space that it could allow them to utilize as a sort of a payment center. If the county does that, then absolutely they will be interested if that could be available. But those things are not contingent upon what they're going to be willing to do with the project. So I think you got some good questions, Mr. Malinowski, but I just wanted to make it clear, and Ms. French can speak to that as well, that none of those things are contingent upon what True Vista may do as an independent service provider in Richland County.
Mr. Chair, if I still have the floor, could I get a legal opinion on that? I heard what the administrator said, but would they be allowed? I mean, let's find out now so that the potential provider and staff knows, would they be allowed legally to utilize government space to set up an office to conduct private business?
Yeah, Brad Farrah from legal. Yeah, so under home rule, let's see, 4932 and 3, you've got governing body has contract authority as well as authority to dispose of real and personal property, which includes leasing. So, you know, the issue there is obviously anybody who's in a county facility, you want to have some sort of a lease, even if it's a nominal or deferred rent, just to spell out the rights of the parties. You know, if you know, something were to go awry in the building, you'd want to address the premises issues and things like that. So you really want to memorialize the relationship, and it can be a basic lease, but you want to have that. And the other issues I heard were speculative. I heard things like, you know, that if something became available, then they want consideration. So it doesn't sound like there's anything on the table in the form of a contract for this service. And again, the only issue would be whether or not, you know, a lease has been proposed or considered.
You okay, Mr. Malinowski?
Well, I just lastly would like to know, seems if we're going to be approving to move forward with this provider, that we should have some type of it wouldn't be an IGA because it's not intergovernmental, but some type of an MOU in front of us so we can see exactly what we're approving, not just the hit and the miss and promises.
Well, yeah, Mr. Malinowski, if I can speak to that again, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Again, originally, I think that there was more of a tie, more of a partnership, direct connection, because at the time, we thought that the provider would be potentially able to do what they call joint trenching. simply meaning that they will occupy the same space with our utility lines. But what we have learned is that's not feasible due to some of the construction liability. So that's not even a consideration. So really at this point in time, the information before the body is more along the lines of you have a service provider in that area who has said that they're willing to do work in that area. And really, it's not something that council is approving. You know, a service provider that's going to do work in that area would not come to the council for approval. And so this is more of an awareness at this point. Anything that if there was anything that you would be approving, which is not the case today, would be whether or not you were in fact providing some space in a facility that you currently don't have. And that's all something that's in the future. But as of today, there's really nothing for you to take action on or approve per se in terms of True Vista's independent business model. And maybe I'm saying that incorrectly, but we're not asking you to allow True Vista to do something that they could do as a private entity, is what I'm trying to get at. So
then this is for information only, and we really do not need to approve or disapprove this, is what you're saying.
It's, I guess, it's ceremonially, but I mean, True Vista as an independent business, I don't think normally businesses would come to the council and say, hey, we want to do work in Richland County, and you would have to approve that. It's just that the way this came about was a different mechanism. It was originally designed to be a joint venture with our trench, but some things changed where that could not happen. So, but True Vista is still interested in doing their business. And again, I'm gonna have Ms. Carla French on the line. She's the president. She can speak to that herself. But these other things that were brought up were opportunities for Richland County to consider. And in considering those things as a body, you would be able to share with this potential provider what Richland County may be willing to look at and consider, just as a part of this entire process. But there's not a specific vote for this organization to carry out their work if they're going to carry out work in that area. There's no necessary direct tie to which if the council said, well, no, we're not approving something, True Vista could take the same action that they were going to take with or without the council's approval based on my understanding of their business.
Well then, Mr. Chair,
Mr. Malinowski, could we just, if you don't mind, please, sir, could we please allow the president and COO to communicate just so we're all clear, please?
Yeah.
Order. Can I know the exact question that is being asked of the president before she answers a question that I'm not clear what question we're posing to her to answer for the body?
Mr. Brown, can you respond to Mr. Manning?
Sure. I think what I'm literally trying to clear up is that True Vista as a business, that what they're proposing to do in the Southeast is something that, regardless of what Richland County does today, they have a business consideration that they are considering, and that's ultimately going to drive, what they do with the Southeast project. And that Richland County's support of that could be if in fact the county at some time does have a facility and they are willing to allow space, that would be great. And also, if the county is in a position to where it receives funding that could be utilized to support broadband in the Southeast, that would be great. But those things are not contingent upon True Vista's decision as to what they would do with their project.
Mr. Chair, this is Carla French. May I say a few words?
Yes, please.
All right. So, Mr. Chair and council members and administrative staff, thank you for letting us participate tonight. And I'll try to clear up from Mr. Malinowski and Mr. Manning some of the questions. And Mr. Brown, thank you for doing such a great job of trying to help lay the groundwork for us. So there is nothing to be voted on in front of the council tonight. But because you all had previously approved our co-location in the trenches that were being done for the water and sewer project, I wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page and make sure that the spirit of partnership was something that you all were interested in, because without that, then it's not a fruitful business decision for us to move into Lower Richland County to try to help serve these underserved areas. So when the staff first came to us, you know, we do this like we do any other business case. We looked at the opportunity. There were some significant savings with the idea of being able to participate in the trench that was already being dug up. And so the business case looked attractive. Once we found out that we were not going to be able to co-locate in the trenches, then we had to revisit and add, you know, $2.5 million of cost to the project to see if it was still viable for us to serve roughly 3,000 underserved homes in Lower Richland County, and would there be enough appetite there to build out and spend, you know, significant dollars building out and making high-speed broadband available to those homes, and then how many of those would take that. When we go into a community, we like the local government leadership to be a fan of what the services are that we will be providing into that footprint. And so really tonight was just to make sure that you all understood that we have looked at and are willing to invest in Richland County, not only for the roughly 3,000 homes that are underserved, but also for the businesses in that footprint. And then in the spirit of partnership, because I think that's the way it works best in our history has shown that if this council is willing to, you know, look at, and as I share with Mr. Brown, he's absolutely correct. None of these asks are contingent upon, you know, that they don't have to be a yes in order for us to consider doing this, but it does help us gauge a spirit of partnership. And because we added additional $2.5 million in cost after the due diligence was done, then, you know, the thought was if everybody's working together to make this happen, is there an opportunity to help defray some costs for True Vista? And some of that is around, you know, deferred or free rent, whatever you want to call it, for some period of time for us to discuss when and if that becomes available, and then to help develop grant applications that could help us defer some cost as well. And so, you know, the hope would be that you all would be excited about coming into, about True Vista coming into Richland County and offering high-speed broadband to roughly 3,000 homes. And the business case is not a home run. It will take participation on those residents' part to be able to make it a home run for us with the additional costs that we're looking to incur. So it really is just a matter of confirming that we're working towards a spirit of partnership, and that you are willing to consider options as time goes by. And I don't think those are big asks. I think those are, you know, things that could be done over time that would just demonstrate to me and to our company that there is a willingness to work together to bring high-speed broadband to, you know, roughly 3,000 underserved homes in Richland County.
Thank
and
you.
I'm happy to answer any questions that you all might have.
Mr. Chair, do I still have the floor when I yielded to Ms. French?
You are Mr. Manning, Hatter. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I yielded to Mr. Manning too. Okay, thank you, Ms. French, for that information. That clarifies it for me quite a bit. And from what I am hearing, our administrator says there's nothing to vote on. Ms. French says there's nothing to vote on. So I would make a substitute motion that is to accept Ms. French's comments as information and create a resolution of support for their company conducting business in Richland County.
You heard substitute
Mr.
motion.
Moore,
Second.
I enthusiastically support your substitute motion. Thank you, sir.
Substitute motion moving properly second. I have Newton and Jackson to speak to this
Based
item.
on that motion, I withdraw my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Newton, you recognize.
I also withdraw my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. So what's before us now is these Mr. Madden, I'm sorry, Mr. Malinowski substitute motion. If there are no, Mr. Madden, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So since things have changed, and we've got that clarified tonight, the $85,000, do we still have that in our checking account, or is that in somebody else's bank account?
Mr. Manning, I'm not sure whose bank account that is in, sir, how far that we've put down conduit, but True Vista did say that that they were still willing to uphold the commitment that they made originally, and that whatever amount of those funds that we had spent of the 85, that they would return those funds, I guess that's the best way I could say it, to the county. So I'm not sure how much of that funds we have used to lay any conduit, but to the extent we have, I believe that that has not changed, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, so substitute motion moving properly second by Mr. Malinowski regarding the resolution. If there's no further discussion, Ms. Only.
Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry,
Mr. Chair, would Mr. Malinowski or someone else please just repeat his motion? Thank you.
Ms. Malinowski, you want to repeat your motion?
Sure, Mr. Chair. My motion is to accept Ms. French's comments or her report as information, and Richland County create a resolution of support of their company conducting business in Richland County.
Any further discussion, clarification? If not, I'll ask Mr. Only to call the roll for the substitute motion.
Malinowski,
Yes.
Dickerson,
Yes.
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
Kennedy, Manning,
Yes.
Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may
You
I have the
recognize
floor
Ms.
for
Myers.
just 10 seconds? I'd like to thank my colleagues for supporting True Vista. I'd like to thank True Vista. As you all know, this has been a struggle. We've asked every major telco to do this broadband build out in the rural area of Richland County, in Hopkins, Gadsden, and Eastover, and it's been a resounding no. And I'd just like to go on the record to thank True Vista for actually looking at the business case and looking at not just the 33 miles of network that they would build alongside where we're trenching, but an additional almost 30 miles to cover all of rural Lower Richland. A lot of school kids are going to have their lives changed because of this, and I just want to thank them publicly. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson, you want to recognize?
Yeah, just very briefly, I wanted to just simply say as a former educator, Mr. Chair, that the benefit of this goes far beyond the residents there. And I think Ms. Myers touched on it at the end of her comment in terms of just what we're experiencing right now with children and students in Richland 1 who do not have the ability to be able to connect via the internet, will have the ability going forward and won't have to get into a car and drive to a school and park in the parking lot to be able to access broadband as a direct result of this. So the benefits are far beyond just the residential and commercial receivers of this opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr.
May I say one thing?
Yes, I think Mr. Farr, did you want to speak to? Go ahead, Ms. Dickerson.
Please go to Ms. Dickerson first, but I just wanted to say something very briefly at the end. Thank you.
Okay, I really want Ms. Myers to know that, my heart is with you 100% on that, because this is something I've been trying to get done for years and having such a difficult time. And every time we get where we think that we're at a crossroad, we run into a roadblock. So I will continue to work with you, for you, to make sure that we get broadband in Richland County. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Ms. Farr?
Yes, sir. Yeah, not in any way to impact anything that council just did as far as the vote, but I would request, you're about to go into executive session anyway, I believe, on a couple items. I would request an exceedingly brief executive session on this item that you just approved. And again, not changing the vote in any way. It's just a little point I need to make in executive session, if that would be the pleasure of the council. Thank you.
Thank you.
Move to go into executive session to hear the legal side.
And there's motion to
Can we do it all at one time? I mean, I don't want to go in and out of executive session. Can we just, if we want to move this item to executive session or to a committee for next week? I mean, I think that would be that's my opinion.
Yeah, this is Brad. Yeah, y'all, whatever you want to do, it's great. If you want to do it at the end, which I think we're pretty close anyway, but I don't need it right this second. Thank you.
Well, what we have for executive session at this particular point is we have the item from the evaluation committee, and also I think we have one of the grievance committee items is what we have for executive session at this point. And if we choose to do the one regarding the broadband reference, Mr. Brad, we can do that one. So the motion going to executive session will be primarily, as I said, what we've agreed on so far is the evaluation committee and the grievance committee. Mr. Malinowski, your motion is for those items for executive session?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair.
Is there a second for those executive session items? It's moving properly second. Ms. Only, can you call the roll for those executive session items?
Yes, sir. Malinowski.
Mr. Chair, may I get just for just this one item or for all of our executive session?
It's Ms. Dickerson. We got it's for those two items, unless someone wanted to add the one.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Yes.
Dickerson.
Yes.
McBride.
Yes.
Livingston.
Yes.
Walker.
No.
Kennedy. Manning.
No.
Jackson.
Yes.
Myers.
Yes.
Newton.
Yep.
Motion passes.
Let's take the first item is the grievance, and whoever was staff need to be in that one, and then after that one, it would be just council members for the one dealing with, and yes, council members, the one dealing with evaluation. So Ms. There's an executive session, and those with council and those persons staff think needs to be in executive session with us for the grievance.
Okay, just 1 minute.
Mr. Chair, I believe it may be appropriate for me to go into executive session, and then if there are specific questions that I cannot answer, then bring others in. But I think it would be appropriate just for me right now.
All right, have you choose, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, oh, okay. All right.
She's gonna give us something. There you go. You can join now.
Never mind. I got back. At first, it was a big blank screen. Thank you, Barry.
Mr. Chairman, I move we come out of executive session.
Second.
You're on mute, Mr. Chair.
It's been moving properly second, and we come out of executive session. Ms. Only, can you call the roll? Reference the motion, come out of executive session?
Yes, sir. Malinowski,
Yes.
Dickerson,
Yes.
McBride, Livingston,
Yes.
Walker,
No.
Kennedy, Manning,
Yes.
Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we go into executive session for legal advice on the broadband issue.
The motion will go executive session, legal advice on the broadband issue. Is there a second? Motion.
Second.
Motion dies for lack of a second. Who seconded that?
Ms. Dixon was talking over. Did I hear a second?
I seconded it.
It's been moving properly second. To go into executive session to discuss the broadband issue. Ms. Only, can you call the roll for the motion to go to executive session?
Yes, sir. Malinowski,
No.
Dickerson,
No.
McBride, Livingston,
No.
Walker,
Yes. With the note that I think we should hear from our legal counsel when advised as such.
yes, sir. Kennedy, Manning,
Absolutely.
Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Can you now get into executive session? Hello?
Hello.
Hello.
Hello?
Really?
Secretary, motion come out,
So move.
executive session.
Second.
It's moving proper second, come out executive session. Ms. Only, are you with us?
Yes, sir.
Can you call roll for the motion come out executive session?
Yes, sir. Malinowski,
Yes.
Dickerson,
Yes.
McBride, Livingston,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
Kennedy, Manning, Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Mr. Malinowski, are you there to be recognized?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. If this is the proper time, I would like to make a motion regarding the grievance that we went into executive session for.
You recognize for that?
I would like to make a motion that no disciplinary action should be placed in the employee's personnel file, and that the employee should immediately be given an appraisal where any shortcomings can be addressed.
You've heard the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Moving properly second. Any discussion reference that motion? Or any other motions? If not,
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a substitute motion that we follow the administrator's recommendation.
Second.
it's moving properly substitute motion, moving properly second, follow the administrator's recommendation.
Mr. Chair, point of order. I withdraw my second to the previous motion. I'm sorry. I was following the wrong thing.
He's following the wrong thing.
I
So
withdraw my second to whatever I was seconding.
that brings us back to
Two.
that's the original motion now. Then Ms. Malinowski, your motion second was removed. So
Point of order.
yes.
Point of order. Mr.
Go ahead,
Chair,
please.
Ms. Myers made a substitute motion to accept the administrator's recommendation, which was seconded by me, and I stand by my second.
Thank you. And so Ms. Malinowski's motion was the first motion. Thank you for that correction. So what's before us is a substitute motion. Any discussion on substitute motion? There being none, I'll ask, Ms. Malinowski, you want to recognize? No? I'll ask Ms. Only to call the roll for the substitute motion to accept the administrator's recommendation.
Malinowski,
No.
Dickerson, McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
Kennedy, Manning, Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Miss Only, I vote yes.
Yes, ma'am. Newton.
Newton votes yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you. That brings us to the second item discussed in executive session regarding the recommendation from the evaluation committee. Ms. Newton.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Livingston, I
Yes.
apologize for the interruption. Can you all please reconsider the previous item 19A?
Mr. Chair, I move to
Move to
reconsider.
reconsider.
The motion is
Second.
proper second to reconsider 19A. Ms.
What's 19A? I put my agenda away.
The grievance.
Thank you.
Ms. Robinson Culver, Ms. Arlington Culver.
Yes, sir. Malinowski,
Yes.
Dickerson,
No.
McBride,
No.
Livingston,
No.
Walker,
No.
Kennedy, Manning, Jackson,
No.
Myers,
No.
Newton.
No.
Ms. Only, if I was on mute, I'm not sure I voted yes.
I got you, sir. It failed.
All right, that brings us to the other item, session executive session regarding temporary employment from the clerk's office.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Newton, you recognize.
I move to proceed with candidate 1 as discussed in executive session.
You've heard the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
It's moving properly second. In discussion, there's no further discussion. I'll ask Ms. Only to call the roll for the motion.
Yes, sir. Malinowski,
Yes.
Dickerson, McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
Kennedy, Manning,
Abstain.
Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Move to reconsider.
Thank you. A motion of reconsideration. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
It's moving properly second for reconsideration. Let me ask the clerk call the roll for reconsideration.
Sir. Malinowski,
No.
Dickerson, McBride,
No.
Livingston,
No.
Walker,
No.
Kennedy, Manning, Jackson,
No.
Myers,
No.
Newton.
No.
Motion failed.
Move to adjourn.
I'm glad to. I've been in this same seat for ever since 2 o'clock today, so I'm ready to go.
Second.
Point of order. Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Quick point of order.
Yeah, just want to very quickly point out to the clerk that I was not available for voting until item 17B of tonight's agenda. Therefore, any votes prior to that, I was physically not present. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. And look, I have a motion and a second for adjournment. Any further questions? No. Ms. Only can carry the vote for adjournment.
Yes, sir. Malinowski,
Yes.
Dickerson, McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Oh, no, I'm not going anywhere. Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
Kennedy, Manning, Jackson, Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Thank you. That passes.
Y'all
Good night.
have a great night.
Good night.